have a long history with plaster. It was first introduced to me in an art therapy material psychology course I took before enrolling in graduate school. With this material, I felt at ease. I learned how the plaster cloth is thermally responsive and warms up while you're working with it, and then cools before hardening completely. It's almost a mirror of one's own experience in a body. I experimented with the material in an academic sense, determining how it could be useful clinically, to engage a patient with an organic process and connect them with an awareness of their own body contour and temperature. This felt relevant especially in the context of medical illness or surgical experiences, where people frequently feel detached from their bodies or, due to invasive procedures, feel an actual or perceived sense of loss of bodily autonomy or physical agency. As my painting series developed, sculpturally and texturally, I found myself revisiting plaster more consciously. I was again drawn to the flexibility, durability, and process of becoming, moving from warm and fluid to cool and cold to hard and matte dry. The painting started to transform into sculptural entities. It was hard to describe why I created the first one. I only knew I needed to keep building. I accentuated its contour, both physical and emotional. I forged deep crevices, fractures, joints, fault lines, masses, plateaus, gorges, new formations. It was neither explicitly anatomical nor geographical, and yet somehow both. I resisted the urge to incorporate color. Color is the language of affect, and so I continued to practice restraint and reserve. I experimented with physical tension over pigmentation. I introduced other materials, pumice, aluminum, charcoal. I built physical armatures out of soft sculptural materials. I repurposed found materials in my home, and I made them foundational. As I continued in the series, the pieces formed their own narrative. They somehow located themselves in myth and memory as well as the present. Later in my clinical practice, I worked as a psychotherapist in palliative care, and again I returned to plaster. This time in casting the clasped hands of loved ones as they approached end of life. These sculptures were meant to be transitional objects, again to bridge a liminal divide, and to provide comfort and closeness against the backdrop of psychological disorganization that for some people proximity to death inspires. I worked with parents and children, partners, spouses, siblings. It was all so exquisite and heart-bending, and the more that I sat with the plaster material in a clinical sense, the more emotionally reserved I became. It's hard to say that now because I've dedicated so much of my life to working with others in a healing capacity, and this time was and is precious to me. However, in order to sit with this scale of loss, I mentally went elsewhere. I've created 6 sculptural paintings in the series. They speak to me of my own mythology, what it meant to previously use this material as a healing bridge with patients in medical or surgical spaces, and what it's like now to use this material for myself and to order and reconstitute my own psychological process. My recollection has grown sharper with distance. I can close my eyes and recall the sensory imprint of my hospital work, but when I feel oversaturated with memory, which is not as frequent now, I lay my feet in the desert sand and I garden. I look east at the mountains and I smooth sage through my fingers. These things bring me into the present moment. However, I don't truly want to forget. There was a period of time where I did feel like I wanted to purge myself of the images that had welled up after years of keeping it all behind a safer psychological seawall. But now I want to honor my relationship to the plaster as a medium. I can feel it patching and repairing the raw and exposed edges of my thought lines. I notice how it responds to my own body temperature. I'm comforted by its short life cycle through heat to cold. I observe its stillness, and I am grateful for its dry finish. In this current piece, I closed my eyes while working for the first time. I was trying to access an interior space from a near impossible angle. My vision was failing to see within the obscured structural space I'd created, so I closed my eyes and I felt my way forward. I experienced trust for my process on a deeper level. The material was slick and sensually pulled against unseen edges, lying flat and smoothing out in other places. I trusted my own touch. I trusted my own sense of the form itself, which, to my surprise, was not rooted in the visual, but rooted through a much more visceral bodily level. I noticed my sense of urgency dissolving, and I did not rush. I worked with the material until it found a resting place, and I opened my eyes. These sculptural paintings leverage my intuition, knowledge of gravity and physics, beyond aesthetic awareness and facility with sculptural material and tools. Some viewers interpret the works as sinew, muscle, bone, and respond to the surface tension created in the space. Others have felt haunted, as if they were visiting another time in history. Both experiences hold truth. The tension reveals itself through the addition and subtraction of layered form and texture. And I grapple with thoughts on pigmentation and the dialogue between adding color to reflect emotional content or relying on structure and form to tell the story. How much of the story wants to be told? I fluctuate between wanting to expose everything and wanting to remain behind the repair work, mending, and memory. In this piece, titled Recall, the knowledge that every sculptural work in the series is both body and earth comes quietly forward. Where does the earth end and my body begin? Where does your body begin and where does it end? And how can we be both?